Shalom, everyone. Yahu be with you. Welcome to our second reading of our Israelitish origins. This is lecture number 2, relation of Abraham's posterity to the three grand races of mankind. And before we get into this, I want to apologize if any of it sounds racist or bigoted. Please keep in mind this was written in the 1800s. They had a different way of speaking back then. And they were also more cognizant of history and things that we are not. So please forgive me, but I'm going to read through this and we'll talk about it as we go. The Adamic Dispensation, the flood, covenant with Noach, Babel, Tartar, Negro, and Caucasian races, the European family, the foretelling of Noach, contrast of the European family with the most anciently civilized portions of the three grand races, designs with regard to Yisrael. Elohim shall enlarge or persuade Japhet. And they did enlarge Japheth in China. We've talked about that before, but we'll go ahead and continue. Elohim made man upright, made him, quote, in his own image, unquote. And he was equally happy as he was set apart. His will was in unison with that of the framer and sustainer of all things. And thus, being in harmony with universal nature, it suffered not those painful collisions to which, in consequence of sin, it is now so constantly exposed. As man became alienated from Elohim, from the true good, or Tov, the light of Yahuwah's countenance, so did he become subject to that wretchedness which results from his possession of active powers adapted for communion with the spiritual world, but undirected to their proper object. In this low estate, man was not left by him who alone could help him. Elohim manifested himself unto Adam in a manner fitted to his fallen condition. Deliverance through the great atoning sacrifice was then revealed. It was promised that, quote, the seed of the woman, unquote, should bruise the serpent's head. Genesis or Bereshit 3:15. And in place of the insufficient covering of his own workmanship, with which Adam, in his first emotions of shame, had covered himself, he was clothed with the skins, as we suppose, of the animals slain in sacrifice at the first institution of that new mode of worship, which was then appointed for him, as requiring to be redeemed by the blood shedding of the Lamb of El, and clothed with the righteousness of him in whose name alone we may approach the Father. He's seen in the picture the things that were done in a parable, the things that I've tried to explain before. He's just showing that it's not a novel idea. The, quote, Tov seed, unquote, being thus shown, or sown rather, in the first family of mankind, they were allowed to multiply and replenish the earth. But even in that early period of history, there was a distinction of races. The descendants of Cain were emphatically wicked, whilst the sons of Seth were called the sons of Elohim. Bereshit 6:2. And please bear with me, but this gentleman was inaccurate in this section. He was not cognizant of the book of Noah or the fact that actual giants were real and the sons of Elohim are literally messengers who were literally imprisoned in darkness for the wickedness they did. And their children were what we would call the Titans. There's a gentleman on YouTube his channel's Mud Fossil University. And while I don't agree with everything that he shares because I don't believe space is something that's real, it's a Jesuit contrivance. They've been purporting it for 500 years. But the facts, the DNA evidence, the things that he has to share are very important. He can prove man's DNA in fingers that are 3 feet, a fingertip that is 3 feet wide, or a palm of a hand that's 3 feet wide. He has both of them that were just found in his land. There's more evidence that he has that he shares. But the fact is, they were very, very large, and their children were smaller, and their children were smaller yet. But that's a digression for now. My point is, he made a mistake here. And while that messes this part up, it doesn't change the overall topic. So please bear with me. In process of time, these two races intermingled, and the result was a powerful progeny, but their power was not consecrated to Yahuwah. Men, as they grew mighty, became monsters in wickedness, and as they replenished the earth, they equally filled it with violence. Their enormities called for vengeance from Shamayim. The waters of the flood were sent to quench the fire of their lust and to sweep them with their works of wickedness from the face of the earth. Of all the families of mankind, only one was spared, the family of Noah, which together with the individuals who had intermarried therewith was preserved in the ark that Noah was directed to prepare. During the 120 years he testified against the unrighteous generation, or that unrighteous generation, and preached righteousness, pointing to the rest that remained for the people of Elohim, of which the ark was a type. And he's addressing the millennial reign. It has been remarked that from the creation of man, Elohim was preaching righteousness and had been writing his Besorah in even the names of Noah and his progenitors. Thus, Adam means red, earth, out of which man was formed. Or it may be from, and that would be Adam or Adamah. Or it may be from the other Hebrew word signifying image, which is Dama, and Adama would be I am or my image. I am an image. And made of earth. Man was formed after the image of Elohim, which we lost in the first Adam, who is of the earth, earthy, but we have it restored in the second Adam, who is Yahuwah from Shamayim. And he's the Yahuwah, the Son, who is given the Father's name. Seth, the son of Adam or Adam, has his name meaning placed or set. Man made of earth and in the image of Elohim was set in Eden by his maker. But by his sin, he set himself in a wilderness of thorns and briars. And then Enosh means mortal, referring to the deathful state into which man was precipitated by his fall into sin. Canaan means lamentation, the result of that state of spiritual death to which man had then fallen. But Mahalalel brings into view Yahuwah, the deliverer, this name meaning El to be praised, or the praiseworthy El, which the word was even before he came down to earth to accomplish our redemption. His humbling himself is taught in the next name, Yerad, meaning he shall descend. He dedicated himself to take upon him the form of a servant and to become a messenger to those who received his message with the utmost despite. This service is expressed in the next name, Chanak, which means dedicated. The ministry which he fulfilled until the time of his being offered up was that of a teacher come from Elohim. Never man spake like this man, and the subject of his teaching to his chosen taught ones much related to the decease he should accomplish at Yerushalayim, meaning what was going to happen to the truth after he came. Sorry about that. Which seems to be the object pointed at by the next name, Methuselah, meaning he sent his death. He died for our sins and rose again for our being declared right. And then he who said, I am not sent but to the lost sheep of the house of Israel, send forth his taught ones with power to preach the Tov tidings of great joy. Lamech means to be afflicted, and to the afflicted, tossed with tempest and not comforted, the desolate woman, Yeshayahu 54. The lost house of Israel was the Besorah more especially sent. The name Noach describes the character of the message which has proceeded from Yerushalayim through Yahuda, through Samaria, through Asia Minor, through Greece, and still more northwestward, until having reached these isles afar off, it is being spread out unto the uttermost ends of the earth. It is rest or consolation. It is comfort you, my people, says your Elohim. It is an invitation to enter into rest, into the enjoyment of perfect shalom, whatever troubles may abound. To take refuge in the ark of safety, of which that built by Noach was a faint shadow. Thus, in the first names of the unrighteous seed, the 10 generations between Adam and Noach, of the righteous seed, the 10 generations between Adam and Noach, we have most distinctly written the great purpose of Yahuwah with regard to mankind, and Yisrael in particular. The names together as given in 1 Chronicles 1 through 4, without the assistance of any interposing words, read, Man placed mortal lamentation. Elohim to be praised shall descend dedicated. He sent his death to the afflicted, rest or consolation. The afflictions of Yahusuf, Amos 6:6, and the fact that the birachot or blessings of the Besorah have been mainly addressed to his descendants and through them to the world will hereafter engage our attention. So the afflictions of Yahusuf and the fact that the blessings and the good news being sent through them primarily is what he's trying to prove. And that's what I've been saying with America being Menashe and Ephraim being the Commonwealth in Great Britain. Together, they are only 2 of the 12 tribes, or 13 if you want. And of those, they're only of Yahusuf specifically. With Noach, a new covenant was made, and it was that no such sudden destruction by the waters of a flood should end the present dispensation. His children might therefore with confidence go forward to multiply and replenish the earth, and the bow in the cloud was appointed to be a token of this covenant, that when they looked upon it, they might think upon Elohim as remembering his promise that the showers should fall in measure, that the clouds should be girt, as it were, with the band of the Almighty, and no more burst upon the world with waters of a universal deluge. The family of Noach seemed to have left the mountains and come down to the more inviting plain of Shinar. Here on the site of Babylon, the first of the tyrant list of empires which have so sought to lord it over men, did they seek to centralize the race of man in a grand confederacy against the will of Shamayim. Early did Babylon oppose itself to the king of Shalom, who has chosen Zion and desired it for his habitation, saying, "This is my rest forever. Here will I dwell, for I have desired it." Yahuwah confounded the folly of these early founders of a universal empire independent of him, who alone has a right to reign. He forced the rebels to disperse, and the three families of Noach, according to the divine appointment, were scattered abroad upon the face of all the earth. Like the Adamic Dispensation, that of Noach went into utter apostasy, and the whole world was being covered with idolatry. But Elohim remembered his covenant with Noach and brought not such an overwhelming judgment as the flood to sweep away all his posterity from the face of the earth, and adopted another method of dealing with mankind. He chose one to whom and to whose posterity he would show especial favor, upon whom he would bestow a very superior training, and who should be the dispository of his lively oracles, as well as those through whom he would communicate blessing to the other families of mankind. Before proceeding further to trace the purposes of Elohim with regard to this chosen race, and to identify them among the nations, it may be well to comprehend what the general masses of mankind are, from whom they are to be distinguished, and among whom they were to be a baraka. There are three grand races of mankind. These have been distinguished from each other by form of head and other physical marks, as well as by intellectual and moral character. Now, physical marks and colorings have changed by intermarriage over time. These things are not as accurate as they used to be, and this is in no way meant to be degrading or disrespectful to anyone. No one's denied joining the house of Israel and becoming one in his hand with them. Doesn't matter who you are, whether you're natural born or a stranger that joins with them, we all have to be grafted into Mashiach. Not that any one of them has qualities of which the others are entirely deficient, but each race possesses in very different degrees and modifications those qualities which are common to all. In the masses, the races may be clearly marked out from each other and are known as the Colmac Tartar, what we call the Mongolian or the Mongol, the Caucasian, and the Negro or the blacks. Okay. The Colmac Tartar races seem to have been appointed the northern portion of the world. This is another tragic error, but again, when you use the wrong names and titles and you are perverting and mixing truth and error, it is impossible for you to have completely accurate doctrine. And this is one of the errors that he held to, if only. So it's something to keep mindful of, and we want to be mindful that we're not doing that ourselves. There they exist in very different conditions. As Laplanders in the extreme north, they differ very much from their brethren transversing the great wilds between Russia and China. Still less do they resemble the Chinese, who, as being most stationary, seem to have retained more of the ancient civilization of the race, as received from the first fathers of mankind. Europe appears to have been anciently possessed by this race, and on the discovery of America by the modern possessors of Europe, it was found to be considerably peopled by them, except in the case of China. The Japhetic races are generally found very thinly spread over a wide territory. So he enlarged the tent or the place of Japheth. Not only were they a mighty population in China, but they are spread abroad over a large area. The races we are describing have much breadth or width of face and width between the eyes. The cheekbones are wide asunder and prominent, and the whole head is in general very broad, corresponding with their general restless and roving character. In many cases, they are addicted to violence and war, as well as impatient of restraint and ambitious of a proud independence. Their warlike propensities, and those which principally tend to muscular activity, having their organs situated on the side of the head, occasion the breath described. Now, they were known for warlike tendencies because they were the Mongol hordes that had plagued them for a few 300 years and destroyed the Byzantine Empire as it had stood for a very long time. It was the punishment sent against the people for being corrupt and worshiping Jesus. We'll go into that in more detail later. But if you want to know the details on that in depth, I encourage you, and I've mentioned it many times before, to look at the Antichrist for Dummies video series from the YouTube channel ChristmasIsALie.com. It says the physiognomy, otherwise is corresponded. The features are harsh, the parts not well proportioned according to our ideas of beauty, which he means the Fibonacci sequence or the golden ratio. The hair is long and straight, and the beard scanty. In the North American Indians, it scarcely exists. This, however, seems to be partly produced by art, just as, in the case of the Caribs, the breadth of the head has been aggravated by pressure in infancy. The complexion is somewhat of an olive hue and varies from that of the Dunlander or of the Dun Laplander to the color of the red Indian transversing his wide-spreading wilds, where the physical powers must, of course, obtain freer expansion than amid the snows of Lapland, or as being cooped up so closely as in China. Correspondent to their form of head, these races have in general manifested considerable mechanical skill and have frequently made extensive conquests. These, however, they more easily make than retain. They can execute, but seem rather wanting in masterly wisdom, and require a superior moral and intellectual power to guide their great force to a proper end. And I don't mean to be disrespectful, but unfortunately, that power using them as a great force to a improper end right now are the Jesuits of Rome, just like they've used America and Britain to take control over the Asiatic countries. They have been using these Asiatic countries in communism and other areas to push their agendas. They're literally pitting all sides against each other and using their enemies to fight their battles, quite like the Art of War battle plan that they put out. And for anyone that is not aware, the Art of War from Sun Tzu, if you dig into it, and I know I didn't say that name right, it was written by a Jesuit, and all Jesuits get their marching orders from their general. What that was presumed to be is the literal plans of what they were intending to do, made public and disseminated in a way where they can receive it, and it was hidden. F. Tupper Saucy, in his Rulers of Evil, exposes that and goes into great detail about how it's actually been played out in front of us. Says they do not sufficiently care for those under them. China seems to be rather an exception, but even there, the exposure of children is allowed, and it's worse now. Um, and not to be disrespectful again, but these are just known phenomenon. My wife even told me who uh, her mother's Filipino, that she had difficulty, and all of her family has difficulty producing milk for their children. It's just how they are. Um, and we can't change that. It's not a thing against them, but we can change what we choose to do as we learn the word, which is important for all of us. But it says this: the Japhetic race has less care for children than either of the others, and it may easily be observed that in them generally there is less of a projection over the cerebellum in the region of the head allotted for that propensity which gives an interest in the young. On the opposite side of the world, and chiefly in the vast continent of Africa, we have the Negro races, the supposed descendants of Ham, and the actual descendants of Ham and those that had intermingled. These in general have the head elongated behind, forming in this respect a considerable contrast to the Japhetic races, and the Negroes have as remarkable for their love of children and fondness for nursing as the Tartar tribes are for their indifference in these respects. So they're very caring for their children in contrast. The forehead is narrower and perhaps also lower, correspondent to their deficiency in reasoning, power, and mechanical ingenuity. The upper and middle part of the head, where is the organ of veneration, is generally high, but there is a deficiency in that which gives a tendency to form ideas respecting the spiritual world and to hold communion therewith. Consequently, the mind is left more to the influence of objects of sense, and worship is apt to be rendered to the sensible creature rather than to the unseen creator. They more easily become subject to others. They have intelligence, but seem to have little forethought or power of planning, and require to be cared for like children. Now, I I don't think that that's true for everyone in such a manner, but generally we can be manipulated, and these were known. So I'm not going to get into that. You can get upset if you want to, or we can acknowledge reality. We've all been played and manipulated. The fact that we are susceptible to some things more than others is just a fact. We all have our vices and we all have our strengths. We have to acknowledge those. But this isn't universal, which he also mentioned. Says they can more easily be seduced into unreasonable acts, but they have much gentleness and affection and power of being made useful when properly trained. Their mildness is indicated by a comparative narrowness of the head over the ears. The wide-headed Japhetic races cannot be so easily managed. It need scarcely be remarked that the Negro races are generally distinguished by prominence of the lower part of the face, especially the mouth. They have black, woolly, strongly curled hair, and the blackness of the skin is about as uniform with regard to the children of Ham as the brown color is to the descendants of Japheth. which, however, seems mainly occasioned by climate. In some countries, the children of Ham are comparatively white. These races appear to have early taken possession of the lands in which the families of Abraham were first to be planted. And that's something that was a contrivance of the adversary because they were his willing minions and they did things that he wanted. Thus, Cush inhabited Arabia, destined for Ishmael, and Canaan took possession of the very land of promise itself, and even northeastward of these countries, in ill-fated Babylon, we find Nimrod, the mighty hunter before Elohim, erecting the throne of his empire. This central position was not, however, designed for the descendants of Ham, and they have long been expelled from their usurped domain. The children of Shem, generally called the Caucasian. Now, it says they've been expelled, but that's not necessarily true because Ham's line married into the direct male line of Shem, with Nimrod's daughter marrying Eber. And if you remember, they became the caste, the Kohen. They were not the rulers anymore, but he was the direct male heir, the firstborn from Shem down. But continuing here, it says the children of Shem, generally called the Caucasian race, occupy the central position and chiefly inhabit southern Asia. We find them spread over Armenia, Persia, Arabia, and the thickly peopled regions of India. The Yahudim are an improved specimen of this race, and so also are the chief of the nations. Yirmiyahu 31:7. The modern inhabitants of Europe, these people are generally characterized by an oval face with regular features. The head is more remarkable for height than either for length or breadth, although it has in general a goodly proportion of both. The reflective region is especially well developed, and so also is the imaginative. They have the largest proportion of those powers which regard the spiritual world and which tend to give an elevated and refined exercise to the intellect. When allowed to grow, the beard is abundant in this race, the hair is softer and more pliant than in any of the other families. Stature and complexion seem to be greatly modified by climate. In some quarters, as in the burning plains of India, this race may be found quite black, while in more elevated situations and in temperate climes, they are found fair and still fairer, until in Europe we find them with the lily hand and rosy cheek, the azure eye and flaxen hair, correspondent with Yirmiyahu's description of what his people once were. Lamentations 4, verse 7. Her Nazarites were purer than snow, they were whiter than milk, and they were more ruddy in body than rubies. Their polishing was of sapphire. And we also have the book of Taffy. It mentions that Yirmiyahu's eyes himself were blue. Although Dawid's daughter there, Zadik Yahu's daughter, Taffy, her hair was black, but she was of a pale complexion otherwise. It says this race may more generally be characterized as having the head elevated and elongated in front, with delicacy of texture and beautifully proportioned features, meaning they fit more proportionately with the golden ratio. And the idea that there's attractive features to the Hebrews is scriptural. It is actually, you can find that referenced in the ancient history of Caldonia, that the women were more beautiful than the Egyptian women, and the Egyptians desired the Hebrew women because of it. They became jealous of them. Another reference is in the Dead Sea Scrolls in what is called the Genesis Apocryphon, where you have Abraham's first-hand writings along with Noah and Lamech. But in that, Abram is in Egypt, and he's recounting when the Pharaoh's ambassadors had seen Sarah and were reporting what she looked like to them. And she was very beautiful, had perfectly defined features, hands, thighs, and everything. They go into great detail, and they're praising her for her whiteness. So anyone that wants to can go look at that. But the point is that they were proportionately featured. But although the head is more finely formed, representing a greater proportion of the reflective faculties, imaginative powers, and religious sentiments, yet altogether the mind has less force, indicated by the comparative smallness of the head. The brain is better in quality and form, but less in quantity. The Yahudim and modern possessors of Europe are exceptions to the latter part of this rule, in whom the head is not only more beautifully formed than in even the other branches of the Semitic family, but it is also greater in volume than in the case of either the Negro on the one hand or of the Tartar on the other. It may be remarked that the European branch of the Semitic race is rapidly spreading westward. From the east, they came into the maritime parts of Europe and have gradually pushed the people to, quote, the ends of the earth, unquote, who previously possessed these countries, or have taken them up to become one people with them and make with them partakers, and make with them partakers of the same blessings. After renewing their strength in these islands, Yeshayahu 49:1, this improved family of the Semitic race has launched out on the great Atlantic. The tide of immigration has rolled over that world of waters still further west, encroaching upon the Japhetic race in America, which the sons of Japhet there were coming over to the Americas around the same time that the Mongol hordes were attacking Europe. They came over on ice bridges from Russia, and they went in from Canada and then came down in south. They found an indigenous white red-headed people. Some of them they called giants, 7 to 8 feet tall. The culture there was many Hebrews. There may have been others, but they systematically wiped them out, killed them all off, and integrated the rest. That's why we didn't see any white men generally when the Europeans came. So all of our Hebrew ancestors that were here were killed or amalgamated. And then the same thing happened, that they had sown, that they reaped. So it's the universal law of how reality works. Um, but he will not completely destroy his people, although he will destroy in every place to which he sends them because of what they have done to his people. So I'm not trying to get into any race wars or things like that. I just want to explain things so people can comprehend a little bit of the history of why things have happened and how it relates to the truth that is in his word, right? We've all suffered the folly of our choices and our forefathers' choices. What we want to do is acknowledge what is right, what is wrong, and not continue in the evil, no matter what is going on or who we are, right? That is the ideal situation. But it says, they came upon the Japhetic race in America as it did in Europe, and appears destined to spread until the wilderness be wholly inhabited, which has been inhibited by the Jesuits in Rome. stopping us from taking the land and making it our own and making it government land in most of the west part of America here. And the desert rejoice and blossom as a rose. Yeshayahu 35:1. With all their faults, they seem to be eminently a seed which Yahuwah has blessed, or Baruch. Yeshayahu 50 or 61:9. In Bereshit, Genesis 9:25 through 27, there is a remarkable foretelling by Noah with regard to his three sons. We there find Ham punished in his seed, verse 25, a point in which, judging from his race, he would be most likely to feel, whilst Shem is Baruch in the object of his religious regard. Verse 26, and in his descendants the religious sentiments are the strongest, while Japheth, in whose name means persuasion or enlargement, was promised emancipation or an introduction to the tents of Shem. And although long shut out from the peculiar privileges of the people of Elohim, at length more especially with regard to them, was the middle wall of partition to be broken down. Ephesians 2:14. And free access to be had into the liberty wherewith Mashiach does make his people free, persuading them by his favor to become fellow heirs of the kingdom, much mingled with the posterity of Shem. The descendants of Japheth, quote, dwell in their tents, unquote, filling the place of upper servants, whilst not only has Canaan been cursed, but the lower place, that of the mere slave, has been generally left to the other children of Ham. And the freeing of slaves was also foretold to be done by the sons of Yahusuf there, which has been accomplished in America and Britain. And while it wasn't done in the most pleasant way, it did cost us quite a bit of suffering. It was accomplished as foretold. Elohim has especially manifested himself and his great deliverance to the posterity of Shem, who have even, as we have seen, the greatest natural capacity for that kind of knowledge. Not only has the true religion been more abundant with the Shemitic race or Semitic race, but false religions have also abounded. And I'd say most all of them have really flourished from the Semitic race. But while Ham was the instigator of reintroducing idolatry, it blossomed in Babylon and spread from there. Again, at Satan's instigation, because he knew where the Baraka was to be coming from. The truth, however, will prevail, and then indeed shall Shem be Baruch, and be given still more fully his place at the head of the family of man. Japheth, intermingled with Shem, will occupy the place of a servant born in the house, whilst the curse being removed from Canaan. And to be perfectly honest, I don't see where he gets this. The stranger is like the native in the land. There's one law. It's not like an upper born servant. So anyone that joined with them became one with them. They weren't like a servant. Uh, just these are the facts in scripture. I don't no need to go further beyond that. He did have servants. There were people who were joined him in that capacity. It was not people who freely chose to do so, like the mixed multitude. You just have to remember that the mixed multitude also grumbled and complained and led us into idolatry and caused problems, right? So it says, whilst the curse being removed from Canaan, he will be Baruch through the ministration of Shem, and the whole race of man, or the whole family of man, taking refuge in the ark of the covenant, will become the blissful family of Elohim. A singular contrast may be observed between the European family and even the most civilized portions of each of these three grand races. Besides their nomadic branches, which, as being too far separated from the main stems to retain the full advantages of ancient civilization possessed by their immediate descendants of Noach, or who, in consequence of other changes, have been thrown into a state of utter barbarism and seem quite incapable of regaining what they have lost, there seems to have been a portion of each, which, as being more stationary in the original seats of mankind, has retained a sufficient knowledge of nature and of art to procure for it the appellation of, quote, civilized, unquote. Thus, of the same race with the wandering Tartars, we have the Chinese. Of the Semitic or Caucasian race, we have the Hindus, and of the children of Ham, of the same general race with the Negroes, we have the most anciently civilized empire of Egypt and their kindred along the coast of Palestine. These three nations, the Chinese, the Hindus, and the Egyptians, appear to have with difficulty retained what they have had from time immemorial. In some instances, they seem rather to have lost than gained, and the practice of the arts they have often retained without knowing the principle according to which the effect, the aim, is at, I'm sorry, and the practice of the arts they have often retained without knowing the principle according to which the effect they aim at is produced. Not so the European family, and especially that of the Anglo-Saxon origin. They had lost all and were stripped naked as in the day they were born, when they presented themselves here in the West. Hosea 3:3 or 2:3. But they have not remained as those generally do who are thus left destitute. They have evidently been given a principle of life, and onward and upward tendency, which is not merely of use to themselves, but in general gives an impetus to all with whom they come into contact, who must either yield to its influence or be broken down by it. Theirs is not merely a retentive capacity, but also an inventive genius. Theirs is not a contentment with empirical practices. They must know the principles of the arts they practice, by the knowledge of which not only is retention of the arts ensured, but also a way opened for the new improvements and discoveries. The great work of self-instruction is ever going forward. They are not bound down to the limits of the knowledge possessed by their fathers. They are wiser than all their teachers among men. Psalms 129, verse 99. Or that should be 119, I'm sorry. Verse 99. For Elohim himself has been their instructor, both in nature and in favor, and he has given them a capacity to receive his instruction and communicate it to others, above what any nation or number of nations has ever possessed. This is no matter of chance. We shall see that it is according to the original purposes and whole course of Elohim's procedure with regard to Yisrael, which are very fully expressed in that remarkable song of Moshe, Deuteronomy 32, which this is the song of Yahuwah, not the song of Moshe. The song of Moshe is in Exodus 16, I believe, which is almost identical to the song of the Lamb in Gad the Seer, chapter 1. It has to do with Jesus and his rider being swallowed up in the sea. This one, Deuteronomy 32, has to do with when our power's gone and we're trying to call on the wrong name, he's going to mock you for it. So we don't want to continue in that, right? But it says, when the Most High divided the nations their inheritance, when he separated the sons of Adam, he set the bounds of the people according to the number of the children of Israel. And here's another tragic error. It's not his fault. He was going according to the Masoretic text or what was recorded by the KJV, but um, that is not accurate. It should have said according to the sons of Elohim, which were, as explained by Kepha in the recognition, messengers that were set over the 70 families that were split up after the fall at Babel, each one being the principal over those people and being there to lead them astray from the truth if that was their inclination. They were contriving with Satan. Some of them were working together with him for his purposes, but not all of them serve them. Mikael, the one who is like El, is the chief over his righteous remnant, and he is the only one that was working with him when Yahushua was fighting against the king or prince of Persia, if you will. Which again, the beast kingdoms are ruled by Satan. It says, why should Yahuwah thus set the bounds of other nations according to the number of a people not yet born into the world? Please forgive this. Okay, now, while there is some legitimacy to this, because as there were 70 families of 70 children of Yaakov that went into Egypt, so there were 70 nations that go into Mystery Babylon here. There is a parallel with his children being spread amongst all nations. There is a parallel there, but that was not what was said. It was the children of Elohim, the sons of Elohim. Now we can become them, but the meaning here was not men. So I just want to make that point emphatically clear, but we'll continue. It says, because this people were intended to compass these nations, which they could not do unless their numbers were proportionate to the bounds of the people they were intended to encompass. And so it follows, for Yahuwah's portion is his people, and Yaakov is the lot, i.e., cord or measuring line, chabal, or cable. That's where we get the word cable in English, of his inheritance. Then follows a description of the careful training by which they were to be so far fitted for the important purposes which Elohim had in view with regard to them. And there is an extended foretelling, clearly recognizing the fact that the purpose of their creation was not accomplished during their former sojourn in the land, nor indeed could it be without their going forth to encompass the various nations which Yahuwah intended to bring within his fold. When this end is accomplished, then goes forth the joyful invitation with which the song concludes. Rejoice, you nations, or Goyim, his people, Amo, for he will avenge the blood of his servants, and will render vengeance to his adversaries, and will be merciful to his land and to his people. Amo. All right, and with that, we have finished lecture number 2. Please forgive me for anything that might have seemed disrespectful there. There's nothing intended in that to be so, although I know that it can be a touchy subject sometimes. If you have any comments or questions, if you'd have anything that you'd like to add to or detract from what was shared, please do. And as always, you have a wonderful day. Thank you for your time.